So yeah, we're going to get back on this topic of immigration, particularly black immigration, and its effect on affirmative action and Native blacks or American descendants of slaves, ADOS. Want to start right here on Wikipedia and just give some background on, for instance, in particular Nigerians, how they got here and who actually is here, who's represented in the Nigerian population. These stats are from Wikipedia, and under the heading of modern immigration, states here that according to the United Census Bureau, 4% of Nigerians hold the PhD degree compared to 1% of the general U.S. population. 17% of Nigerians hold a master's degree, and a whopping 37% have a bachelor's degree. Since the mid-20th century, particularly after Nigeria gained independence, many modern Nigerian immigrants have come to the United States to pursue educational opportunities in undergraduate and postgraduate institutions. In the 1960s and 1970s, after the Biafra War, Nigeria's government funded scholarships for Nigerian students, and many of them were admitted to American universities. While this was happening, there were several military coups interspersed with brief periods of civilian rule. The instability resulted in many Nigerian professionals emigrating, especially doctors, lawyers, and academics, who found it difficult to return to Nigeria. The exodus contributed, backing up, during the mid to late 1980s, a larger wave of Nigerians immigrated to the United States. This migration was driven by the political and economic problems exacerbated by the military regimes of self-styled generals Ibrahim Babangida and Sani Abacha. The most noticeable exodus occurred among professional and middle-class Nigerians who, along with their children, took advantage of education and employment opportunities in the United States. This exodus contributed to a brain drain of Nigeria's intellectual resources to the detriment of its future. Since the advent of multicultural democracy in March 1999, the former Nigerian head of state, Olusegun Obasanjo, has made numerous appeals, especially to young Nigerian professionals in the United States, to return to Nigeria to help in its rebuilding effort. Obasanjo's efforts have met with mixed results, as some potential migrants consider Nigeria's socioeconomic situation still unstable. So, just to set the stage, as we see here, beginning in the 1960s and 70s, with the influx of Nigerian nationals moving to the United States as a result of a Biafran war. No doubt they came here as refugees. And a lot of times when we think of refugees, we think of poor people, particularly economic refugees, so to speak. But in this case, we see that according to the Wikipedia article, many of the Nigerians immigrating here were professionals, especially doctors, lawyers, and academics. So this was the bulk of the population of Nigerians moving here. Already doctors, already lawyers, already academics with advanced degrees. That was the 60s and 70s. In the 1980s, a larger wave of Nigerians immigrated to the United States. Again, this was political, economic. Again, the most noticeable exodus occurred among professional and middle-class Nigerians who, along with their children, took advantage of education and employment opportunities in the United States. So again, another larger wave comes in the 80s. Again, many professionals already holding advanced degrees, already accomplished, to move to the United States. And again, take advantage of education opportunities, employment opportunities, so forth and so on. And as I stated in the earlier article, in which the 77% of U.S. black doctors supposedly being Nigerian was called into question, it stated how there was a dearth of Nigerian doctors actually available to practice in their own homeland. And that statement's backed up by this document, this Wikipedia article, where it says the exodus contributed to a brain drain of Nigeria's intellectual resources, and that was to the detriment of its own future. So you have a mass exodus of some of your best, some of your brightest, most accomplished professionals, academics, lawyers, doctors, so forth and so on, PhDs, all leaving the country, all coming to the United States for one reason or another, never to return to their homeland. And apparently that has left a lot of holes in their game as far as their ability to build a solid infrastructure. So again, they've left their homeland never to return, and that has actually done damage to their homeland. So there's a lot to say for people who would leave their homeland for opportunities and opportunities to enrich themselves elsewhere, and never to return and apply those same resources, experience, and knowledge to their own homeland. One thing they do send home is a lot of cash. Remittances are definitely in the billions from the United States to Nigeria. I believe maybe 22 billion roughly a year. I may be able to pull that stat up. So that's one aspect, the immigration issue. And this can't be good for Native blacks. There's just no way that is good for Native blacks. I'll get into some instances later, in particular in the areas of education. So the next heading was about education. Nigerian culture has long emphasized education, placing value on pursuing education as a means to financial success and personal fulfillment. Talk about a famous Nigerian, Jacob Olupono. Getting down here, a disproportionate percentage of black students at highly selective top universities are immigrants or children of immigrants. Harvard University, for example, has estimated that more than 1/3 of its black student body consists of recent immigrants or their children, or were of mixed race parentage. Other top universities, including Yale, Princeton, Penn, Columbia, Rice, Duke, and Berkeley, report a similar pattern. As a result, there is a question as to whether affirmative action programs adequately reach their original targets: African Americans who are descendants of American slaves, and their discriminatory history in the U.S. According to the 2016 Open Doors report, the top 5 U.S. institutions with the largest student population of Nigerian descent, in no particular order, are Texas Southern University, University of Houston, University of Texas at Arlington, University of North Texas and Houston Community College. And according to a 2017 report, 11,710 Nigerian immigrants studied in the U.S. in the 2016-17 academic year, the 12th highest country of origin and highest of any African country. 4,239 of these, 36% are pursuing graduate degrees. And Texas is, wow. And Texas is overrepresented. There's in the United States, I believe that Texas has the largest Nigerian population. I believe I did see that stat. I may be able to pull that up. So just want to first get into that modern immigration with Nigerians and their exodus to the United States. The educational, and look, this is not a knock to the culture and the educational practices of Nigerians. The only thing that we're talking about here is the effects of them migrating here, emigrating here, and the negative impact on native blacks. And as we can see here, Wikipedia talks about the disproportionate percentage of black students at highly selective top universities, Ivy League schools, are immigrants or children of immigrants. And there's questions as to whether affirmative action programs that were originally intended to assist American descendants of slaves are actually doing what they were intended to do in assisting American descendants of slaves. Apparently, that is not the case. And here's a stat: United States with the largest Nigerian populations. Okay. Texas with 60,173. Maryland with 31,000 plus. New York with 29,000 plus. California, Georgia, Illinois, New Jersey at 14,000, Florida at 8,000 plus. We got Massachusetts and Pennsylvania bringing out the bottom two of the top 10. So again, there are questions for those who doubt the validity of my previous videos, in which I brought up the topics of black immigrants, African immigrants moving here and directly benefiting from programs that were not intended for them to benefit from. So move over here to this article by the New York Times. This was from June 24, 2004. So I was glad to pull this article, and I was glad it was so old, because this shows that this is not a new phenomenon, and it's been a problem, it's been an issue, and it's been going unaddressed. And moving forward, we're definitely trying to address these issues. And at first, before we can address them, at first we have to bring them to light, and that's what I'm hopefully doing. So this article, the headline, the byline is, top colleges take more blacks, but which ones? At the most recent reunion of Harvard University's black alumni, there was lots of pleased talk about the increase in the number of black students at Harvard. But the celebratory mood was broken in one forum when some speakers brought up the thorny issue of exactly who those black students were. While about 8%, or about 530 of Harvard's undergraduates were black, Lanny Guinier, a Harvard law professor, and Henry Louis Gates Jr., the chairman of Harvard's African and African American Studies Department, pointed out that the majority of them, perhaps as many as 2/3, were West Indian and African immigrants or their children, or to a lesser extent, children of biracial couples. They said that only about 1/3 of the students were from families in which all 4 grandparents were born in this country, descendants of slaves. Many argue that it was students like these, disadvantaged by the legacy of Jim Crow laws, segregation, and decades of racism, poverty, and inferior schools, who were intended as principal beneficiaries of affirmative action in university admissions. I'll read that again. Many argue that it was students like these, descendants of slaves in America, disadvantaged by the legacy of Jim Crow laws, segregation, and decades of racism, poverty, and inferior schools, who were intended as principal beneficiaries of affirmative action in university admissions. So that, affirmative action was for those who were directly affected by the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, mass incarceration, redlining, lynching, and all other sorts of atrocities, systematic oppression. Not for those who just moved here in the 1960s, in the 1970s, 80s or forward. Those benefits weren't for you. And if you have partaken in those benefits, then you have actually taken, an opportunity away from someone who it may have been intended for. That's all. So what concerned the two professors, they said, was that in the high-stakes world of admissions to the most selective colleges, and with it entry into the country's inner circles of power, wealth, and influence, African American students whose families have been in America for generations were being left behind. I just want people to be honest enough to talk about it, Professor Gates, the Yale-educated son of a West Virginia paper mill worker, said recently, reiterating the questions he has been raising since the Black Alumni Weekend last fall. What are the implications of this? Both Professor Gates and Professor Gunier emphasize that this is not about excluding immigrants, whom sociologists describe as a highly motivated, self-selected group. Blacks, who make up 13% of the United States population, are still underrepresented at Harvard and other selective colleges, they said. The conversation that bubbled up that weekend has continued across campus here and beyond as these professors and others publicly raise painful and complicated questions about race and class and how they play out in elite university admissions, issues that some educators and Black admissions officers have privately talked about for some time. And again, remember this was in 2004, we're in 2019 now. And when problems go unaddressed, they usually don't get better, they usually get worse. And this is a problem. So I think, the next paragraph starts, there's no consensus on the answers, and since most institutions say they do not look into the origins of their Black students, the absence of hard data makes the discussion even more difficult. So, they're not actually breaking down the origins of the Black students. If your skin is Black, if you check that African American box, guess what? You can get in, even though you're not legally an African American. It sounds cute, but if your parents emigrated here from Nigeria and you were born here, you're technically a Nigerian American. And moving forward, I'm going to do a video on that. We're pushing to have that designation added to all paperwork, applications for everything, as well as the United States Census. Country of origin. And if you're not 5-6 generations deep, you're going to have to identify where you're from. Simple and plain. So I just wanted to get back on that. I'm not going to drag this one out. But again, I'm here for the discussion. There's another article that I came across. This one was on the Griot, and this was from 2011. Again, history is best qualified to reward all research. The older the better, the dustier the better. This is from 2011. First article was 2004. And I just want to hop down to this paragraph. The article states Harvard has more black students than ever, but are they African American? And jump down to this paragraph here. Back in 2007, African students constituted nearly 40% of the black students admitted to Ivy League schools. Why is that troubling for African American students? It's not that African American students begrudge African and Caribbean students their success, but their admittance often gives opponents of affirmative action an argument that racism is no longer an obstacle simply because of their success. Being that they're actually not from, our origin, they don't have our history here, they should be designated as a separate class. But if they're identifying as African Americans, then by them succeeding, coming from a culture of success, many coming from, again, two-parent households with advanced degrees, then African American failure is masked by African immigrant success, simply put. So again, just wanted to hop back down on that. I may touch back on it. The last video on this topic got quite a few comments and critiques. I welcome all comments, pushback, criticism. In my comment section, don't forget to drop down, like, don't forget to subscribe to Dirty Laundry Media, hit the notification bell so you can be alerted when I drop new content. Thanks again for tuning in. And again, no disrespect to anybody, just report the news as I see it and advocate for my people, American descendants of slaves. And I'm out. Bill Money, Dirty Laundry Media. Thanks for tuning in.